the latest edition of the Templar Report with me, your host for today, Nick Griffin. Now, it's an unusual report in that it's all about Britain, that it's not live, and I can't see your comments. Don't worry, please make the comments and I will look at them later and we'll talk about those another time. This is because we're switching all sorts of things around. It's all chaos here. Everybody's well, but we're using a new system for getting to Purge TV. And owing to various problems, I haven't had it explained to me. I've tried to follow various online tutorials, but like Brother Jim and Sister Transome for that matter, I'm a complete Luddite technophobe and a boomer to boot, so I can't work the thing out. Hence, sadly also, no pictures or videos for you tonight. But a really important show nevertheless. As I say, all about Britain. For those of you abroad, I apologise, but at the same time, it may be useful because if what could happen does happen, because people know you've got contacts who understand what's going on in Britain, there'll be all sorts of people saying to you, what on earth has gone on? We didn't see this happening. Why is Britain in flames? So I'm not saying it's going to happen yet. I'm saying it could happen on Saturday because there's some very powerful, influential people want it to happen. So first of all, a bit of the background to this is a great deal of tension building up in Britain because there's a huge pro-Palestinian march proposed for next Saturday, the 11th, in central London. Nothing particularly unusual about that, except for the fact that the 11th is, of course, Armistice Day, the anniversary of the signing of the armistice and the coming into force of the armistice in the First World War. Now, normally, Armistice Day is completely forgotten. There's a 2-minute silence that almost no one, present company accepted, pays attention to, and there is an inside memorial service in the Albert Hall in central London. Other than that, everything carries on as normal. Football matches, everything else, whatever it is. But all of a sudden, this has become ultra sacred, and there's a deliberate effort by various sections, in fact, all the conservative media, and a lot of troublemakers online, to, in people's minds, confuse Armistice Day with Remembrance Sunday, when, of course, wreaths are laid by assorted political vermin who pollute the cenotaph on that day. That's rather another story. And there's a lot of tension building up because the organisers of this protest say it's going ahead on Saturday. We're going nowhere near the cenotaph. There's not going to be any clashes there. But that, of course, is being largely ignored. Various people are very angry about it. They've been made more angry in the last 24 hours by the story of an old chap by the name of Jim Henderson, who was selling remembrance poppies in Waverley Station in the centre of Edinburgh, up in Scotland, when he was, well, there was a large flash mob pro-Palestinian demonstration. There have been a number of these in railway stations, and at this time of year there's poppy sellers in all those railway stations, and none have been harmed in the slightest. There's pictures from the one of these things going off in London where the poppy sellers are there, and all the crowd, the pro-Muslim crowd, pro-Palestinian crowd, are looking the other way. No one's bothering with them at all. They're not selling many poppies, for sure, but no one is threatening or harming them in any way. But up in Edinburgh, by contrast, Jim Henderson, a 78-year-old army veteran, wearing a red para regiment beret, his old beret, was assaulted and punched while he was selling poppies in one of these pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And of course, all social media and all the Daily Mail and all of the rest of them, they're implying, or saying, making people believe, that the attackers obviously were pro-Palestinian. They were almost certainly immigrants. No, they almost certainly were not up in Scotland. Not at least recent immigrants. Because there's one group of people in Scotland, most Scots have a very high regard for the British Army, and especially for veterans. But there's one very big group that do not, and that is the 4th, 5th, or 6th, 7th generation famine survivors, the Republicans, the hardcore IRA supporting Republicans, who hate the British Army in general and utterly loathe the parachute regiment because of the Bloody Sunday massacre. Incidentally, the parachute regiment, this isn't a sectarian point or a point against Irish Republicans or Scots Republicans, because the Paras are also loathed in the Protestant Shankill Road, because the week before they massacred various unarmed Catholics on Bloody Sunday, they also shot up the Shankill Road and killed a number of Protestants. That regiment at the time was thoroughly out of control. There's no indication whatsoever that Jim Henderson was part of that. He's simply a good, honest, decent ex-squaddy working to raise money for the Royal British Legion. Good for him. And attacked. But attacked by who? Almost certainly, as I say, in Scotland, by hardcore Antifa, who, of course, because the left is trying to piggyback on the Palestinian cause, will turn up to demonstrations like this. And those people particularly hate the Paras. And especially in Edinburgh, lots of people know about Glasgow Celtic, which is the highly pro-IRA Republican Catholic origin football team, who recently, the Green Brigade, had a huge Antifa banner basically covering the whole of one of the stands. I mean, absolutely gigantic. They're very, very left. But Edinburgh also has Hibs, Hibernians, clues in the name, a hardcore pro-Republican Irish anti-British army football team with thousands and thousands of supporters who think that way. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them. And my money is on Jim Henderson having been attacked by them. And for anyone to imply this is by Muslims, by brown immigrants, is extremely dishonest, unfair, and plain wrong. Anyway, I may be wrong. We will see. Then more has been wound up by the story of the Palestinian poppy. Again, talking about this. And there's a TikTok clip which has gone absolutely viral through all the moronic pseudo-conservative right wing of a woman. And there's Arab music wailing as it goes on. Arab singing, in fact, which is not very Islamic if you know anything about it. Anyway, it's designed to make it sound and appear as if this is an Arab woman, a Muslim woman, cutting up and making poppies with a Palestinian flag, out of the Palestinian flag. And this, probably most Muslims wouldn't think much of that, but the average Brit looks at this, and especially with the wailing Arab singing going on, is absolutely incensed. And Tommy Robinson, Paul Golding, all the rest of them have been putting out this little clip saying, look at them, they're disrespecting our poppy. Except that they're not disrespecting our poppy. As I pointed out on Twitter the other day, do please follow me on Twitter, Nick Griffin BU. It's growing and I'm getting a very interesting and diverse audience. That's a different story. Won't go into that today. Anyway, people are furious about this Muslim disrespect for our poppy, Palestinian attack on our dead hero's memory, etc., etc. Except for the fact the woman doing it, you can only see her hands, she's clearly white. There's, at one stage, a Dalmatian dog pops up in the background. Now, dogs are haram and they're not allowed in Muslim houses unless they're guide dogs. But if you know anything about Dalmatians, you will know they're too stupid and too aggressive to be guide dogs. They're absolutely useless as assistance dogs. So that Dalmatian dog is simply a pet in a non-Muslim family home. Then there's an issue, which I did explain on Twitter, I won't go into it now, about the deliberate subliteracy of the caption, which makes it very, very clear to me as an unusual, educated Brit, that the caption on this thing, look at them disrespecting our heroes, was written not by a victim of the modern British education system who doesn't know where apostrophes go and doesn't know that they don't go in plurals, but it's absolutely written by someone pretending to be a badly educated modern Brit. It's an extremely cynical piece of war propaganda. But that's going out. So everyone's wound up, and Tommy Robinson calls on people to go to London this coming Saturday to defend the cenotaph, even though there's absolutely no possibility of this Palestinian protest march, which has a very, very valid reason for holding a march, despite the fact, I don't like seeing Palestinian flags in a sea in the centre of my capital city, the city I was born. But I also do not like, and in fact like even far less, my taxes, your taxes if you're a Brit, being used by the government as they force every single government building in Britain to fly the flag of Israel, a flag some of whose early supporters and partisans killed British soldiers to fly over that godforsaken land. It's godforsaken now, I fear. The flag of Israel flown on all government buildings, projected huge style onto number 10 and number 11 Downing Street, actually inadvertently saying, this is Zog, this is a Zionist occupation government. That's what you've got, stupid goyim. Keep on paying your taxes. Send your sons and daughters to our war if we decide we want them. Yeah? But the idea is to say Britain stands with Israel. Well, no, we do not stand with Israel. Absolutely not. But we're forced to by our government. And that riles me far more than seeing Palestinian flags, where at least every one of those flags was paid for by the person carrying it or someone else who doesn't have their hands all the time in my taxpayer's pocket. So anyway, Tommy's called this huge demonstration. And lo and behold, announced on forces.net just the other day, although strangely not covered in any of the mass media, every single rail company in Britain has announced that they're going to give free rail transport to any ex-serviceman who wants to go down to London for Remembrance Sunday, even if he wants to go on Saturday for Armistice Day. So they're paying, someone is paying, someone has ordered the railway companies to give free transport to a huge Tommy mob of understandably angry because they've been wound up by all these lies, and I've only told you a couple of them. There's plenty more where they came from. So these ex-squaddies, many of whom, because of the disgusting way they've been neglected and mistreated by the British establishment, have got all sorts of alcohol and other problems. So some of these chaps are still tough, they're still patriots, but I'll be blunt, they are not in the best mental health. Everyone knows this. There's PTSD, all sorts of problems, and they're being encouraged to go down to London to meet up with Tommy and thousands of football fans to confront Muslims and Muslim supporters wandering around London. This is not going to end well at all, I'll tell you that. It's a trap. It is a trap. Tommy Robinson has been trying to provoke a civil war, I'm not exaggerating, literally a civil war in Britain for years now. I well remember when Jim came away and met me half an hour later, ashen-faced, from a meeting where he'd been with Tommy Robinson and various people, including someone he described as his handler, where they tried to persuade Jim and the Templars to take part in a campaign to get ordinary, decent, angry, but very stupid Brits to walk into Muslim ghettos holding up posters of the Prophet Muhammad, pictures of the Prophet Muhammad having sex with a goat. Which, of course, as Jim pointed out, will spark off the most appalling riots. It'll get people killed, and Tommy's just saying, yeah, we know that. Absolutely, that's the whole point. They've been trying to spark a civil war in this country for years, and this is Tommy and his backers, because he's only a puppet. His backers, this is their best crack at this yet. And unfortunately, the other side, there's problems as well. As I say, that it's entirely understandable why all sorts of people want to protest against the genocide in Gaza. And if you think back when the Iraq war was on, there were enormous demonstrations in London, entirely peaceful demonstrations by leftists and Muslims and ordinary concerned, decent citizens. And that so shook, it was the Blair regime that, and it so shook the warmongers that they very clearly decided to make a plan, to implement a plan so that never again would their push for war be so dislodged and blocked by a mass movement of ordinary people on the streets of London and other cities. So hence, they don't want it to go off peacefully, they want chaos. And there's some people on the other side, on the side organising this march, who want chaos as well. It's a coalition of 6 different groups, far left and Muslim. There's the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. That always used to be a front for the Communist Party. There's the Stop the War Coalition, which always has been and is most definitely a front for the Trotskyite Socialist Workers' Party. There's the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign, Friends of Al-Aqsa, the Palestinian Forum in Britain, the Muslim Association of Britain. Now, quite a lot of those Muslim ones are actually Shia, they're actually Iranians. They're very, very close to Iran and to Hezbollah. And because they're Shia, they're the minority, they don't attack us. You wouldn't have any Christians left in the Middle East, in Syria or in Iraq right now if it was not for Iran and Hezbollah teaming up with Russia and the Syrian Arab army to protect secular, decent society in those countries, in general and Christians in particular. Otherwise, the Al-Qaeda and ISIS head-cutting terrorists, who, as I've said before, I'll say it now, will no doubt say it again, were inspired, funded, armed and trained by the British, the Americans and the Israelis, as well as the Saudi Arabians and others, right from the start. And it was the Iranians who fought that terrorism. But they also, of course, they and Hezbollah are ready there now and on the edge of getting involved in the fight to save the civilians of Gaza. So they're not of us. They're different people, obviously. They don't understand how we think. Perhaps they don't even care how we think. They're just doing what they do. But I'll tell you what, the Socialist Workers' Party people who run the Stop the War Coalition and are a key part of the push for this march to go ahead on Saturday and provide the other half of this explosive cocktail, the members of the Socialist Workers' Party, founded by a man known as Tony Cliff, real name Yigo Gluckstein, and its chief, he's dead now, fortunately, its chief theorist now is a man called Jim Rose, also a hardcore Jewish Trotskyite. So you've got people funded and promoted by right-wing, almost fascist Jews in the shape of Tommy Robinson and others on one side, and you've got people wound up by Trotskyite Jews on the other side. Oh, what could possibly go wrong? Well, I'll tell you what could possibly go wrong. Because Britain, to me, looks a great deal like Northern Ireland did in 1969. You've got two populations, at least, who generally detest each other. In Northern Ireland, throughout the middle 1960s, no one noticed it till later. The two communities, Protestant and Catholic, were steadily moving apart as they became less and less comfortable in each other's company. People were moving house, they were getting out of one area, shifting to somewhere else. And I'll tell you, that is going on, has been going on for some years now, in places like Leicester and Oldham and Bradford and Burnley, all over, particularly northern England, the different communities, us, the white English Brits, and particularly the Pakistanis, have been falling apart. In Leicester, likewise, the Hindus and the Sikhs, all moving into their own little semi-ghettos. And in 1969 in Northern Ireland, that process was partly completed, but nothing like it. And it was given a huge push in a weekend of madness when thousands of people on both sides, both communities, were burnt out of their homes by their neighbours. It was apocalyptic, it really was. And what was the trigger for this? A protest march. A protest march by Catholics with real, genuine grievances, but led and manipulated by communist civil rights marchers. That's something older Americans will know all too well about. And on the other side, Protestants with also very real fears about what happens if they lose political power and become the minority, and what happens to them in what happened to their grandparents in Southern Ireland happens to them as well. So both communities, both sides, have got legitimate grievances, and they're exploited on the one side by communists, and on the other, particularly by Ian Paisley, as a hardcore fundamentalist firebrand preacher who wanted to make a name for himself and establish himself as the great leader of his people. People with vested interest winding it up. So this civil rights march was ambushed at a place called Burnt Tollet Bridge by gangs of Protestant heavies armed with steel bars and sticks and stones brought en masse from the local quarry. The police didn't really get involved. Lots of people afterwards said they actually stood back and did nothing, or they even helped the loyalists, because the police were mainly overwhelmingly loyalist at the time as well. And that ambush, it wasn't any kind of massacre. There was a lot of people very badly injured, and the pictures of it went all around the world, especially all around Northern Ireland. Rumours went around the two communities, and it all exploded in an orgy, an absolute orgy of two-way ethnic cleansing. And I'm saying that that is what Tommy Robinson and his backers have been planning and aiming at for British towns and cities for years. And when Brother Jim actually asked them, well, have you prepared for this? If you're going to have a civil war, have you got the containers of guns ready for the white working class people who are going to be butchered? Oh, no, they said. Of course not. That'd be risky. We don't care. No. Cynical, evil, and wicked. And at the end of it, I'll tell you what will happen if it kicks off. There'll be 30 years of horrible bloodshed. There usually is in these sort of things. 30 years is about the time it takes for the generation who started, their sons take over and they're involved, and then their sons are just coming up to the age when they'll be next. And at that point, everyone exhausted and shattered sits down and has a discussion. At the end of the 30 years trouble in Northern Ireland, the men who did most to start it, IRA men like Gerry Adams and others, and Ian Paisley, sat down and power shared and took enormous handouts from the British government and chuckled along quite happily. And our job, we can see this coming, probably can't be avoided, but we can try to avoid it. Because personally, I can see that at the end of 30 years, you get the different communities and they'll be basically separate and they'll find a way to sort of live together in an uncomfortable, uneasy new way of doing things. It's going to happen. Wouldn't it be far, far better if it happens without all the bloodshed? If we can short circuit that and go straight to talking about their grievances, Palestine and so on, and our grievances, grooming gangs and all the rest of it, and finding out where we can actually set these things aside, where we can understand them, where we can put them right, and where together we can stop our real enemies, the globalist elite, screwing us all with their lockdowns and their compulsory LGBTQ plus poison for our kids and so on. We've actually got common ground with these people, but only when they learn not to be wound up by the actual hardcore Islamists, though also in their ranks, the Sunni crackpots, who particularly have a great deal of influence within the Muslim Association of Britain. They've got to push theirs to one side, and we have to push our pound shot Paisley and his ilk to one side as well. Final thing, just to make things even worse, we've got a Home Secretary who's in charge. It's not Sadiq Khan who's actually in charge of policing in London. In the end, it's the Home Secretary, one Suella Braverman, who's some sort of, I think she's a Hindu or something similar, a bit like our Prime Minister. But the name isn't Hindu. She's married to a Jew who she says is a staunch Zionist. And also, she wants to be Prime Minister. And she's positioning herself by being really tough on things that the Tory grassroots, about 300,000 people, vote to elect our Prime Minister between elections because they're the electorate, they're the people who belong to the Tory party. She's not looking at us, she's not worrying about peace and war, she's simply worrying about how can she get a majority of the Conservative faithful to back her in a leadership challenge against Rishi Sunak, because she wants top job before the next election. And to do that, she's telling crazy, appalling lies. She's calling the pro-peace march a march of hate. And she's saying we can't have it going near the cenotaph. She knows perfectly well, the Metropolitan Police know perfectly well, it's not going anywhere near the cenotaph. But she's winding all this up because if it kicks off and she can look tough, she'll have the leadership of the Tory party and the Prime Minister's position in her handbag. And that's what she wants. So how stupid and how wicked can these people get? And that's it for tonight. I say to people who aren't ours, but who might be watching this, don't blame me. Don't blame the weatherman for saying there's a storm coming. He made that mistake many times. This man, Enoch Powell, I remember as a boy the shock, the relief that went through my household when he made his speech. And being a Celt, being basically a Welshman, he had this capability, they don't all have it, we don't all have it, to see into the future, but he had it. And he saw through a dark glassly what was coming to Britain. When he said, like the Roman, I seem to see the river Tiber foaming with much blood. Didn't happen in his lifetime. He probably didn't even think it would, because he said he was talking about in a few years' time, there'll be 5% of the population and they'll carry on growing. So he wasn't saying it's going to happen next week. I'm telling you now on Enoch's behalf that it could start next week. It's not guaranteed. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying that it could. And if it doesn't start next week, then the people who've tried to make it start will simply go back to the drawing board and they will try it again and again and again. And the only way to stop them is to spread a message like this so that enough people understand what is going on to get out there on social media, to get out there just in discussion forums, to get out there in real life, to get out there talking to their political representatives, writing to their local newspaper editors, etc., 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 and by a mass action of people from our community, people from their community, and all the other communities saying, yeah, this place is a mess, but war is not the way to sort it out. If we have to have a war, we must be ready. If they force a war on our people, then the Templars, we will be there for our people. We'll be the first looking after, for instance, refugees, because having our own refugees, that is, because having a long, long background in Northern Ireland, we know what's going to happen, we know what needs to be what needs to be done, and we've got a machine to do it. So we'll be at the forefront of all of that. But don't for 1 minute think that we want it, because we do not. But as the saying goes, if you wish for peace, prepare for war. I'll remind you, therefore, that freedom, like peace, freedom is never free, because the tree of liberty must be watered from time to time with the blood of martyrs and of tyrants. Dersvold.